Next on my list is Fracture. This is another one of those where it's not really hated, but nobody knows about it. And I find this very, very surprising because not only is it a good movie, but it was theatrically released. There was advertisement for it. I remember seeing the previews, and it has Ryan Gosling and Anthony Hopkins in it. I mean, those are two big name guys, and somehow it completely flew under the radar. Nobody has heard of this movie. The only people that I know that have seen or even heard of this movie are the people that I have actually shown it to, which is a real shame because it's a pretty good movie. I'm going to try to do this spoiler free because I want people to go see this movie. Basically, the basic idea of it though is basically Anthony Hopkins, he's this rich guy. He finds out that his wife's cheating on him, so one day he waits for her to get home, shoots her point blank in the face, waits for the police to show up, confesses, says, "Yep, I shot my wife right in the face," and then he tries to get away with it. Which sounds impossible, but he's actually kind of exploiting this loophole, and it's actually working. But the best thing in this movie is the fact that Ryan Gosling is playing the DA who's prosecuting Anthony Hopkins' character, and Anthony Hopkins just fucks with him. It is so funny. It is so great. And again, I'm not really going to spoil anything, but I'm just going to give you a little example here.
I'm not judging you, Willie. No. Anyone coming from what you came from, then paying your way through East Oakhead College and Tulsa Law by writing papers for Princeton kids on the internet. My God, $60,000 in debt and 97% conviction rate. Wow. You deserve it, kiddo.
What have you been doing?
Oh, I'm permitted the use of a private investigator.
Not to investigate me.
Why not? You're investigating me.
Because you shot your wife.
Allegedly. That's how it works, right? If I can't introduce something in court as evidence, it doesn't exist legally.
I'm not going to play games with you.
I'm afraid you have to, old sport.
And this happens quite a few times in the movie. Like, he just messes with him. It's really great. The only slightly disappointing thing is at the end, there's a reveal. And the reveal is good. But then they kind of keep going past that. And it's kind of like, You know, I think they should have just ended with the reveal. I think they should have just had everything wrapped up and just ended it with the reveal and then just had that be it. But it's a minor thing. All in all, this is still a good movie. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Alright, so the next on my list is a movie called 50-50. This is a movie that was a victim of bad advertising. Because in all the trailers and all the posters, even on the DVD cover here, it says, "From the guys who brought you Superbad." Now, there's a problem with that. This movie is nothing like Superbad. I mean, it's clever, it has structure, it's a completely different type of comedy. It's nothing like Superbad. And this is bad for two reasons. One is because there's a lot of people like me who didn't want to see this movie because I thought it was going to be like Superbad. I actually didn't see this movie in theaters. I actually picked it up in the $5 bin. I'm glad I did. But my point is I was very reluctant to see this movie because I thought it was going to be like Superbad. And then I'm sure there's a lot of other people who did like Superbad who went to go see this movie who were probably pretty disappointed because it's nothing like Superbad. So you really just shot yourself in both feet there. But all in all, this was a very good movie. The story's kind of simple. It's basically this guy, he finds out that he has cancer, and it's just him trying to deal with it. He's trying to beat it. And the story takes quite a few unexpected turns, but unexpected in a good way. A lot of times unexpected, you don't see it coming because it doesn't make any sense. This is not like that. Like, you don't see it coming, but it does make sense. After it happens, you're like, you know what, that was actually very clever. He also kind of goes through like all these different phases, and in my opinion, it felt like they spent the right amount of time with each phase. It felt like, okay, they went through this phase, they did everything they could, and then they moved on to this phase, and then they did everything they could, and then they moved on to this phase. Like, nothing felt overdone, nothing felt wasted, everything just felt like it was the right amount of time. I also think they had a really good balance of comedy and drama. Because, the guy's dealing with cancer. You can't really be too funny. So there is a lot of like emotional scenes and everything like that, but it never goes too much into that. It never gets too depressing. They'll kind of do something emotional and then they'll do something funny. It was a very, very good balance. So the next on my list is The Spirit. I think the main reason why most people hate this movie is because Frank Miller directed it. Because before he had directed this movie, He bitched and complained for years about how other people would take his comic books and just turn them into something else, and then he finally directs a movie, and he basically does the same thing. However, I forgive him for a couple reasons. One is because Frank Miller has actually worked in comics for a very long time, and he's done a lot for the industry. I mean, he's done more for comics than any of these other fuckers who screwed up his movies. I guarantee you that. Two is because not only has he done a tremendous amount of great stories, but he did the impossible. He did a story called Batman and Robin, the Boy Wonder, where he was working with Jim Lee, and he actually made Robin interesting. I know that sounds impossible. I never thought I would say that in my life, but Frank Miller did it. He made Robin interesting. I was reading this story going, wow, this story is actually interesting because Robin is in it. I never thought I would say that. So that right there, Frank Miller's a god. He could do no wrong. Ever again. But the third and biggest reason is the comics that Frank Miller was talking about, the ones that other people ruined, they were comics that were still relevant to the times. Like, people were still behind these characters. They still liked these characters the way they were. These stories were not in need of a revamp. The Spirit was. I mean, the Spirit hasn't been around in years. He completely lost touch with his fan base. He was in need of a reboot. Now, maybe he did make it a little too much like Sin City. I mean, he had to know that he was going to draw a parallel, just with how similar it looked. People were going to compare this to Sin City, and yes, in comparison to Sin City, it does fall short. But overall, I still thought it was a great movie, because I do very much like the visual presentation of Sin City and the Spirit. I like the characters, I like what he did with it, and he still did stay true to a lot of the stories. I mean, a lot of the storyboards, he just cut out comic book panels from the Spirit and glued them on there. I was like, okay, these are the storyboards, we're going to do it just like this. So he did still follow it in a way, but he kind of made it different in a way too. So, I don't know. All in all, I still think it was a good movie, and Frank Miller's a god, so yeah, whatever. Alright, last but certainly not least, just as I promised, Watchmen. Again, this is another one of those things where I don't get the hate. If you don't like Watchmen, okay, fine. If you never read the comic, you don't like the story, I could get that. But what I don't get is there are fans who love this comic, but absolutely hate this movie. And you know what? At least 90% of this movie, probably 95%, is exactly like the comics. I mean, the costumes are straight from the comics. The city is straight from the comics. The dialogue, like I said, 95% of this is straight from the comics. There's so many scenes where it is just mirror images of the comic books. They did change a few things. The biggest one, of course, is the fact that they didn't use the giant squid. And you know what? I was totally fine with this, because I personally thought the giant squid thing was not only hokey, but it felt really out of place, because you have this whole story about all these superheroes and everything, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, giant squid. It didn't make sense to me. But even then, in the movie, they're still doing the exact same thing, basically, because in the comic, the main bad guy, I can't pronounce his name, but he sees that the United States and Russia are on the verge of nuclear war, so he creates this giant squid, places it in a capsule, launches it in New York City, millions of people are going to die, and he's doing this so the world will think that we're under alien attack, and the United States and Russia will be forced to put aside their differences and deal with the bigger threat. So it's basically his twisted idea of a way to bring world peace. In the movie, it's the same thing. He's has all these things rigged up. It's going to create this big explosion. Millions of people are going to die. He's making it look like it was Dr. Manhattan. So the United States and Russia will be forced to put aside their differences and deal with the bigger threat. His twisted mind, trying to bring peace. So it's the exact same plot happening for the exact same reasons. It's just being executed slightly differently. I don't see why people are so pissed. And even if you are just one of those sticklers who just want it done exactly the way it was in the comics, again, 95% of this film is just that, which is a hell of a lot more than most comic book movies. So I don't see what you're bitching about. Unless I'm missing something here. If there's anyone out there who can logically explain to me why it needs to be a giant squid and not Dr. Manhattan, I would love to hear it. And that's not sarcastic. I'm seriously, leave me a comment here, on Facebook, wherever. If anyone can logically explain to me why it needs to be a giant squid and not Dr. Manhattan, I would love to hear it. And please don't leave a comment that says something like, oh, you just don't get it because you're dumb. because that in itself is dumb. Again, a logical explanation, I would love to hear it. So that about does it for my list here. I'm that guy with a different opinion. Hope you enjoyed this video review, although I'm sure most of you didn't. Just remember one thing. You may hate me, but it's only because you know I'm right.